Okay, now one of the things that people, they think they're getting their pockets picked betting in running. So what would you say to someone who's had a bad experience betting in running? For example, they've backed a horse, looked up, they've got 1,000 to 1, looked up and it's fallen.
Well, that happens with the picture delays. That can happen. What I would say is that there are ways to mitigate, which I'll come on to in a moment. But there are also, it's part of the payoff. Um, if I were to say to you, I found a pub just outside Exeter that does the best beer, it's beautifully kept, and it's 50p a pint, but you've got to get 2 buses to get there, and sometimes they only have 3 or 4 beers on. I don't think you'd be focusing on the 2 buses and the lack. You'd be thinking, I'll give that a go. And within running, I think the opportunities that you get are such a big carrot that I think it's absolutely worth looking at. Okay, this is a problem and that doesn't help, but how can we mitigate? Because the rewards can be so great. I use a piece of kit called Gruss. Other software is available, which I didn't use. I think I said in my last interview, I tapped away with fingers and thumbs for years until somebody finally convinced me, just do this. And I used Gruss, and it's £6 a month, and it's just the most unbelievable value for what it enables you to do. And one of the best things for me, I'm not at all techie, it's got loads of tools, you can do all kinds of things. I use very few of them, but one of them that's invaluable is something called fill or kill, where you can set within tenths of a second how long you want your bet to stay in the system. So for example, that is, and I've, not only do I hear of other people who have done it and been frustrated by it, but as I was learning in running, I did these kind of things myself all the time. You see 5 to 1 on a screen, oh, I want to back that, and you don't get matched because it's 4 to 1, 7 to 2, and then something it belts a fence or gets chopped up. Oh, I don't, and now your bet's been taken. So you didn't get your bet when you did want it. You get it taken when you absolutely don't want it taken, and that can be infuriating. But with fill or kill, as I say, you can have it set for 1 second, 2 seconds, whatever you want, so that if you get the price you want, great. If you don't, it disappears from the system, and you're at least not going to have the double whammy of not only did I get this, and I do get that. That's not for everybody. If I want 5 to 1, I want to know that I've been matched and I'm on. I get that that's frustrating. Will I get matched? Won't I? Will I get the price I want? But I think again, the rewards are so great that I think that's worth working with. If you get, I backed that short price favourite, and I got some thousand when it won in running, but only a fiver at 1,000, and quite a lot of it was at 100, and some of it was only at 50. Well, boo-hoo, and it's not going to be perfect. I think when the rewards are that great, it's worth looking at what you can do to mitigate and work around that. You often hear people's first bets is invariably, isn't it, a Grand National. There must be people, thousands of them, millions of them, who, my first bet in the National, jumped the first fine and got brought down by something else. They don't then go to never again, that's it. They have a go, and in running, to me, doesn't seem to get that. If people have one bad, as you say, I backed it, and because I'm a couple of seconds behind on the pictures, somebody knew it had fallen. If something happens like that, it seems to be right, no more in running, rather than okay, well, let's see. And picture delays obviously are a problem. You need to know where you are. Racing TV pictures are about 1.5 seconds behind live. Their streams are a lot quicker than that. You can get those on Betfair. So these days, at least for half of the racing, you're really not too far behind. The other half is more of a problem, but knowing where you are is obviously important. So those two things alone, knowing how far behind you are and where you can play in a race, having something like the fill or kill where you're not going to get, I think these things can mitigate against the problems, which undoubtedly are there. But I do think that, people, for whatever reason, one bad experience and that's it, it's not for me.
Okay, Matt. Well, we got another live, not live, but actual demonstration going on here. So, do you think you see things in running that other people don't?
Yes and no, more no than yes. Obviously, people who don't watch much racing, then yes, I'm going to see things they don't. And there are people who watch plenty of racing who don't really know what they're looking at, and you're going to see more than them. but there are an awful lot of people who do know exactly what they're looking at, and in that respect, no, I don't think I am seeing things that they aren't. It's, as I said earlier, a question of what you're seeing and putting the maths in with that is the skill. And in terms of not seeing things that other people don't, we've got Altior here winning a champion chase. I think if you sat down a room full of experts and asked them what would happen to Altior in this race, for which he started a short price favourite, I would think an overwhelming majority would say he wouldn't necessarily travel with a great deal of enthusiasm. He might be niggled along at times, maybe hit a flat spot. His jumping wouldn't be as exuberant as some, but ultimately he'd just be too strong, too powerful, too good, and he would win, but it may not be pretty along the way. That's exactly what happened, as we'll see, but that didn't stop him going to 8-1 in running, again in Cheltenham markets where, you know, there's plenty of money, plenty of liquidity knocking about in there. So what we're going to do is have a look at it and see why that may have been, and why, you know, it wasn't necessarily a problem. Oh, let me kill the sound. Sorry, Barty. Right, here's Altior, held up in 5th on the inside. We've got Min, Duvan. If I were looking to get involved with a horse like Altior, one of the easiest ways of explaining it, you often hear about petrol in the tank and things like that for horses, and that's not a bad analogy, but it also involves racing styles. Some horses, something like Duvan, you can see travelling here, will give you most of what he's got without you asking for it. They want to race, they're keen, they're enthusiastic. They may be going at 70-80% of what they can give without being asked anything at all. Something like Altior is entirely different. You get the feeling he's constantly going at 20-30%, and if Nico gives him you want another 5% or another 5%, but it doesn't mean that petrol's not in the tank. So if I were watching Altior thinking he might not win, I'd either be looking for his jumping to make such big blunders that they could be race ending, or to lack such fluency that he got himself in a really big hole. Or also, if Nico, I think he's a horse who liked a bit of room to manoeuvre in. So if you see here, Nico's quite often, his hands are just moving, he's niggling along. If you look at Duvan, just hacking along, taking a lovely hold. Well, Altior's never like that. There's almost constantly a little niggle, can I have a bit more, can I have a bit more, don't lose touch here. Ooh, one goes there. But that's just his style. It doesn't mean that it's not there when required. So again, I talked about him needing space. There's a few times when he's niggled into little gaps and running in behind horses. That's fine. The only time I would have worried about him is if he was pulled wide, Nico was really properly driving along and he's still losing ground, then you start to worry. But that just never happens. You can see Min on his outside there in the green cap, another horse jumping and certainly travelling much more fluently than Altior is. But it's still not a problem. If he's niggling, staying in touch, he's roughly where he wants to be. Slightly out jump there, but it's not a big blunder, a little niggle. And every time he gives him the little niggle, gets him back where he wants. Min, again, if you're just looking at these two horses and you didn't know, you'd want to be on Min. He's clearly travelling better than Altior. Coming down the hill here. There goes Duvan out of the race. And at this point, he doesn't want to strike the front. He was almost left in front there, but he doesn't want to be in front that soon. And he now gets shuffled back a little bit, so he has to niggle again. But again, a little niggle, and he's back where he wants to be behind them. The hands are moving. To quote Ruby, his arse isn't in the saddle. It's a niggle along to just keep him in contention. Min again, travelling obviously well on the outside, but Nico's still not really asked for anything. Coming to the downhill fence. Doesn't wing it, but good enough. Again, niggled, but it's a niggle and I'm okay. A niggle and I'm okay. It's never the full down drive. And by this point, I think you've already hit the point where he traded at 8-1, bizarrely. Min, again, clearly, if you didn't know the horses, is the one who's travelling. But Nico, he's in behind horses. He can't, stroke doesn't want to go for everything because there isn't the gap. But as soon as in a moment, you'll see the difference. There's a gap. Now I want to go. So he's got the daylight to go into. Nico is now asking him, and cheerio. And from that point up the hill, it's only ever going to end one way. So in essence there, the reason I'm showing this, you've got a horse doing almost exactly what everybody thought it would do, having gone off as a short price favourite, yet in running 8-1.
Right, Matt, you've mentioned in previous interviews that we did for the Betting People series that you have to sometimes chisel out small amounts on uninspiring racing, but then you take bigger positions at other times. So what are you looking for when you're really going to make it, really go for a big play?
I guess you want everything lined up. We've got another video here that illustrates that. I think the first part of the jigsaw is maybe looking to go against the market. If you look in running either at a horse that's struggling, that you think people are going to want to lay, do I want to back it? Or a horse that is cruising, everybody wants to be on it, do I want to lay it? And of course, there's no point in just going against the market, laying every horse that cruises. You need to have an idea that it might work in your favour. The next thing is a bit of evidence to back that up. So you might have an opinion. In this case, a horse who was seemingly travelling well, but I wasn't convinced was, and then I'm looking for that extra cherry on the top to tell me something that, yep, you're right, and then you go in. So what we've got here is 2019, I think, that could be wrong, Champion Hurdle, and the horse involved is Lorena, ridden by Ruby Walsh here. And she came into this Champion Hurdle slightly strangely in that she was very prominent in the market, despite having form that really didn't entitle her to be. She'd won some minor races very impressively and could have been anything, but there was no definitive proof that she was worth her place in the market, although it was possible. She was even shorter in running because by this point Bouvardere has fallen down the far side. Apple's Jade here, as we'll see, is about to weaken out of it. So two of the main rivals are already out the way. She was a fairly short price anyway. So in running, she was trading fairly short. But I was thinking for some way that, Ruby maybe wasn't sat on as much as it appeared. So I'm looking for more evidence of that, and we'll see it coming shortly. If I run this video on. Apple's Jade is about to weaken right out of it here. Ruby adjusting his goggles there, so you can already sense, I want on that in running from the market as they turn to come down the hill. This is the eventual winner here in third, Melon in front, and Ruby cruising up on the outside. I'll pause it here. This is, as I'll talk about in a moment, I'm thinking at this point that he's maybe not sat on as much as he appears to, but I don't know that at this point. I'm waiting for a sign before I make a move that's the case, and that's about to come up here. She comes down to this hurdle. Doesn't jump it particularly well. And this is the key point here. I'm just going to rewind that back a couple of strides. As she hits this hurdle, this horse makes a move to come in between her on her inside. Now, Ruby may watch this and say I'm talking nonsense, but I would contend that never in a million years would Ruby, if he had enough horse, you can see him there trying to edge over to close the gap, but he simply doesn't have enough horse. I don't think in a million years he would have let that horse up on his inside if he had enough horse to hold it in. I'm going to go back again. The beauty of this in terms of getting everything matched, if I pause it there, as soon as I'd seen Ruby make that move, I want to hold that one in, I can't. Jockeys sometimes, if they're not holding on to as much as it looks, will maybe not throw the kitchen sink at a horse, perhaps because they want to give the impression to other riders that they're holding on to more. Or if you've got a horse like that where the petrol's running empty, you don't want to put a gun to its head, to use the expression, and end up in a worse place. It all falls apart. So I think he has one little, can I hold it in? No, I can't. And at that point, to me, that says he's sitting on nothing, and I can lay that, not with complete impunity, but yeah, I was happy to have a very big lay at that point. In that, I talked about the fill or kill earlier on the Gruss. The beauty of that, I would have had it in for 2.5, 3 seconds in the system. So you're hoping to, or I'm hoping to lay everything that's trying to get on her at that point up to a certain price, but also for the 2 or 3 seconds after I've laid it, the money's there on the screen for people to say, that much, that yeah, I'll have some of that. And the beauty in this situation is that as soon as he doesn't close the gap or can't shut the door, he sits up. So for people watching, I can have that price. Ruby sat there when in my head, it's already over because I've seen enough that he's not sitting on anything. So if we watch it here one more time, doesn't jump the hurdle well. You can see him moving his hands, but also trying to edge across and close that gap. Right, I can't close the gap, but then he just sits there rather than throwing everything at it and maybe falling in a hole sooner than he would have done. And at that point, all my bet will have been matched because people are thinking, well, that's going fine. But eventually push has to come to shove, and this horse we knew was a very strong stayer going into it. It's very much all over from here. And obviously, at this point, probably well before, you know that your money's perfectly safe. I'll pause it there rather than striding up the hill. But to make the point that that extra cherry on the top of information is what you need, what I like to have before making a big bet. There was something quite similar last season over the jumps with a horse called Protector at Aintree, stepping up to 3 miles for the first time, running against Native River, former Gold Cup winner in pretty deep ground, and over racing, jumping perfectly, but tanking along, doing too much. We didn't know if it was that class. We didn't know if it got the trip. And for most of the second half of the final circuit, I was waiting for Native River, who had been niggled and pushed and shoved as he always was, and for Protector at right coming off the bridle, at which point I was ready to launch in, thinking as soon as it does, that's race over. And it never came off the bridle. It eased its way to the front, won by half the track, and Native River was retired on the spot, I think, after the race. So that's why I like to have the extra cherry. Obviously, you're not laying as a shorter price, or on the flip side of the coin, backing at a bigger price if you wait for the extra evidence, but I would rather have that so that I'm as sure as myself as I can be.